My name is Elena Vance, and for 5 years, I was the invisible engine behind one of the world's most powerful tech empires. Have you ever been made to feel like you were nothing more than background noise, a piece of furniture easily replaced? That your loyalty and hard work meant less than a fancy title or a famous last name? That was my life at Novatech, until the night I decided I was done being invisible. The night the CEO who took all the credit for my ideas tried to have me fired for a mistake he made. What he didn't know was that for 5 years, I had been keeping a secret ledger. Not of money, but of every lie, every stolen idea, every unethical decision he had ever made. If you're watching this and you've ever felt underestimated, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. Your support tells me these stories matter. This is the story of how one meeting, one moment of ultimate betrayal, forced me to use the weapon I never wanted to wield. The annual Novatech Innovate Summit was the crown jewel of the tech world's event calendar. 1,000 of the most brilliant minds, investors, and journalists packed into a custom-built pavilion in Silicon Valley, waiting to be dazzled by the next big thing. The air hummed with the sound of millions of dollars in potential investments and the soft glow of countless smartphone screens. I stood off to the side of the main stage, my tablet held tightly against my chest, a nervous flutter in my stomach that had nothing to do with stage fright. In 10 minutes, Julian Croft, the charismatic, silver-tongued CEO of Novatech, would step into the spotlight to unveil Project Chimera, a revolutionary AI algorithm that promised to change data analytics forever. The world saw Julian as a visionary genius. What they didn't see was me, his executive assistant, the woman who had essentially written the blueprint for Chimera during late nights and weekends, the one who debugged the code he barely understood. The idea had been mine, born from a master's thesis I'd abandoned when I took this job, lured by the promise of being close to real innovation. Julian had taken the concept, polished it with his buzzwords, and presented it as his own. It was a pattern I had, foolishly, come to accept. "It's for the good of the company," he'd say. "You'll get your recognition soon, Elena. Be patient." I was 28, and my patience had run out. The stage lights dimmed, and a hush fell over the crowd. Julian strode onto the stage, looking every inch the tech titan in his signature black turtleneck and perfectly tailored blazer. The applause was thunderous. He smiled, a practiced, confident gesture that reached the cameras but never his eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice smooth as silk, amplified by the state-of-the-art sound system. "Tonight, we redefine the future." I watched from the wings, my heart pounding. This was it. Earlier in the week, after a particularly brutal meeting where Julian had once again taken credit for my work in front of the board, I had mustered all my courage. I'd scheduled a private meeting with him. "Julian," I'd said, my voice trembling only slightly, "when you present Chimera at the summit, I need you to acknowledge my contribution. Not just as your assistant, but as the lead architect." He had looked at me with an expression of mild amusement, as if I'd asked for a pony. Elena, he'd sighed, leaning back in his $1,000,000 chair. "You are invaluable to me, truly. But the world isn't ready to see a woman, an assistant, as the brains behind this. It would undermine Novatech's image. Trust the process." The process. A process that always ended with him on top and me in the shadows. As he launched into his presentation on stage, expertly parroting the talking points I had written for him, I felt a familiar sinking feeling. He wasn't going to mention me. Not a word. He was selling my life's work, and I was just a ghost in the machine. Then, it happened. During the live demo, a part of the code I had warned him was still unstable glitched. A graph on the massive screen behind him froze, then displayed a cascade of error messages. It was a minor bug, easily fixable with a command I could have executed in seconds. But Julian panicked. He didn't know the system well enough to recover. He fumbled with the clicker, his smile stiffening. A small technical hiccup, he laughed nervously, but the crowd was murmuring. Investors were frowning. I saw my chance. I started to move from the wings toward the stage to help, but Julian's eyes met mine. And in that moment, I saw not gratitude, but pure, undiluted fury. He needed a scapegoat, and I was the easiest target. He turned back to the microphone, his voice dripping with false disappointment. It seems there's been an error in the final preparations by my team. He looked directly at me, standing there in plain view of 1,000 people. Elena, I specifically asked you to double-check the demo build. This is unacceptable. The silence in the room was deafening. 1,000 pairs of eyes turned to me. I felt the heat of their judgment, their curiosity. I saw the journalists' pens fly across their notepads. Novatech CEO publicly blames assistant for summit failure. I stood frozen, humiliated. This was more than just stealing credit. This was public execution. My career, my reputation, was being sacrificed to save his. The rest of the presentation was a blur. Julian managed to smooth things over with a joke and moved to the next slide, but the damage was done. As the audience filed out for a coffee break, the whispers were all about the assistant who had almost sunk the biggest announcement of the year. Julian swept past me backstage, not even glancing in my direction. "Clean this mess up, Elena," he hissed under his breath. "And see me in my office first thing Monday morning." We both knew what that meant. I was being fired. For his mistake. As I stood there in the empty, cavernous hall, surrounded by the ghost of my own ambition, I made a decision. Monday morning wouldn't be about me getting fired. It would be about me presenting my resignation. But not before I delivered my own presentation. A presentation 5 years in the making. I opened a secure, encrypted app on my phone. The file was simply labeled Ledger. It contained emails, voice memos, financial records, and dated notes. Proof of Julian funneling company funds to shell companies. Proof of him stealing ideas from junior interns and forcing them into silence. Proof of him conspiring with competitors to sabotage smaller startups. I had never intended to use it. I had kept it as a form of perverse insurance, a way to feel like I had some control. Now, it was time to cash in that policy. But I wouldn't leak it to the press. That was too chaotic, too impersonal. I had a better audience in mind. The Novatech Board of Directors. And I knew just how to get their undivided attention. That weekend was the longest of my life. The public humiliation replayed in my mind on a loop, each time fueling the cold, hard resolve solidifying in my chest. I didn't sleep. Instead, I spent those 48 hours meticulously organizing the ledger. I structured it not as a chaotic dump of information, but as a formal dossier. It had chapters: financial improprieties, intellectual property theft, systematic deception, and personal misconduct impacting company value. For each claim, I provided irrefutable evidence, time-stamped emails I'd secretly BCC'd myself on, audio recordings of meetings, legal in our state with single-party consent, a fact Julian never bothered to check, and financial transfers that didn't align with any official project. I was no longer just Elena Vance, the betrayed assistant. I was a forensic accountant, a whistleblower, and a strategist. My small apartment, usually just a place to crash between grueling work hours, became a war room. Maps of corporate power structures were taped to the walls, not with push pins, but with the determined focus of someone who had nothing left to lose. The most damning evidence wasn't the money, it was the people. I had records of him forcing a brilliant young engineer named Liam out of the company after Liam developed a core component of what would become Chimera. Julian had paid him a pittance in a forced settlement, threatening to blacklist him in the industry if he spoke up. I found Liam's contact information. He was working at a small tech repair shop now, his spirit broken. His testimony would be crucial. Monday morning arrived, gray and indifferent. I dressed with more care than I had for the summit. I chose a simple, impeccably tailored navy blue dress, not a uniform, but a statement of professional authority. I looked like a board member, not an assistant on her way to be fired. I arrived at the sleek, towering Novatech headquarters an hour early. The receptionist, Sarah, gave me a sympathetic smile. The news of my failure had clearly spread through the company gossip mill. "Elena, Mr. Croft is already in. He asked me to send you in the moment you arrived." Her voice was laced with pity. "Thank you, Sarah," I said, my voice steady. but I have a prior meeting to attend first. I walked past Julian's office, past the open plan workspace where my old desk sat, and straight towards the bank of elevators that led to the top floor executive boardroom. My heart was a drum against my ribs, but my hands were steady. This was my summit. I had scheduled a meeting with the entire board for 8 a.m., using Julian's own calendar access, a privilege he had granted me and never revoked. The subject line was simple: urgent matter of corporate integrity and fiduciary duty. I knew they would come. A subject line like that sent to a board of directors was like a fire alarm. The head of the board, Arthur Finch, was a septuagenarian with a reputation for old-school integrity and a fierce protection of shareholder value. He would not ignore it. The elevator doors slid open onto the plush, silent carpet of the executive floor. Margaret, the board secretary, looked up, startled. "Elena? What are you doing here? Mr. Croft is expecting you downstairs." "I have a 8 a.m. meeting with the board, Margaret," I said, holding up a sealed envelope and a slim, encrypted data drive. "The materials are prepared." She blinked, confused, but checked her schedule. Her eyes widened slightly. "Oh, I see. They're all inside. They just arrived." She gestured towards the heavy oak doors of the main boardroom. "Go on in." Taking a deep breath, I pushed the doors open. The room was exactly as I remembered from the few times I'd been there to set up presentations for Julian. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, a metaphor for the power contained within. Around the massive mahogany table sat the 12 most powerful people at Novatech. Arthur Finch sat at the head, his sharp eyes regarding me with curiosity, not hostility. The others looked similarly perplexed. Julian was notably absent. "Miss Vance," Arthur Finch began, his voice a low rumble. "This is highly unusual. Your message was cryptic. We were expecting Mr. Croft to lead a debrief on the summit. Thank you for seeing me on such short notice, Mr. Finch, members of the board," I said, my voice clear and projecting confidence I didn't know I possessed. I walked to the head of the table, standing where Julian always stood. "There has been a misrepresentation of events at the summit, but that is the least of Novatech's concerns this morning. I am here today to present a report on the conduct of CEO Julian Croft." A wave of murmurs went around the table. "This is highly inappropriate, Arthur," said Brenda Shaw, a board member known for being in Julian's pocket. "She's an administrative assistant." "I am the architect of Project Chimera," I stated, cutting her off. The room went silent. "And for the past 5 years, I have also been the silent witness to a pattern of deception and malfeasance by Mr. Croft that threatens the very foundation of this company." I placed the data drive on the table and connected it to the large monitor on the wall. "What you are about to see is a curated collection of evidence. I have copies secured with my legal counsel." For the next 45 minutes, I took them through the ledger. I was calm, methodical, and devastatingly precise. I showed them the emails where Julian discussed inflating project costs. I played the audio recording of him instructing the legal team to strong-arm Liam into silence. I displayed the financial trails that led to offshore accounts. I showed them the early drafts of Chimera, with my own handwritten notes, dated over a year before Julian first mentioned the idea to the board. The board members' expressions shifted from skepticism to shock, then to grim anger. Brenda Shaw had gone pale. Arthur Finch's face was like granite. "This is extraordinary," he finally said, when I had finished. "And you have proof of all this?" "Everything is on this drive, with sources verifiable through independent audit," I replied. The glitch at the summit was due to a section of code Mr. Croft insisted on modifying against my advice. His public deflection was an attempt to cover his own incompetence and terminate me to ensure my silence. Just as I finished speaking, the boardroom door burst open. Julian stood there, his face flushed with anger. He had clearly been searching for me. "Elena, what is the meaning of this? I told you to see me in my office." He stopped short when he saw the faces of the board members, the grim silence that greeted him. He saw the evidence still displayed on the screen. His eyes darted from the screen to me, and the fury in them was replaced by a flicker of pure, undiluted fear. He knew. In that instant, he knew the game was over. "Julian," Arthur Finch said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Perhaps you should take a seat. Miss Vance was just giving us a fascinating presentation on the real state of innovation and leadership at Novatech. It seems we have much to discuss." I stood my ground, meeting Julian's horrified stare. The invisible assistant was now the most powerful person in the room. The first move was complete, but the game was just beginning. The silence in the boardroom after Arthur Finch's invitation for Julian to sit down was thicker than the plush carpet. It was a silence heavy with the weight of shattered illusions and impending consequences. Julian stood frozen in the doorway, a statue of a fallen king. The confident CEO who had commanded a stage just days ago was gone, replaced by a man whose empire was crumbling around him in real time. He didn't move towards the table. His eyes, wide with a mixture of panic and rage, were locked on me. I held his gaze, my own expression neutral. The power had shifted, and everyone in the room felt it. "I don't know what lies she has been feeding you," Julian finally managed, his voice strained, lacking its usual smooth authority. He gestured vaguely in my direction. "Elena is a disgruntled employee, angry about a perceived lack of credit. This is an act of vengeance because I was forced to reprimand her for a serious professional failure." Brenda Shaw seized the lifeline. "That makes perfect sense, Arthur. We shouldn't be listening to the hysterical accusations of a junior employee who just cost this company immense credibility." I didn't flinch. I simply picked up the tablet I had brought with me. "Mr. Finch, if I may," I said calmly. I anticipated this deflection. "On the screen, you'll now see the signed non-disclosure agreement and settlement offer presented to engineer Liam Chen, along with the bank transfer records showing the payment, which was logged in the company's internal system as a consultancy fee for a project that never existed. The digital signature is Mr. Croft's." I tapped the screen, and the damning document appeared next to the financial record. Furthermore, the audio recording you heard earlier was timestamped from a meeting Mr. Croft held in this very room. The voice recognition software built into the boardroom's conferencing system can verify the speakers. It was not, as Mr. Croft suggests, fabricated after the fact. Julian's face lost all its color. He had forgotten about the always listening, high-fidelity microphones used for recording minutes. He had assumed his word against mine would be enough. He had underestimated the meticulousness of the invisible assistant. Arthur Finch steepled his fingers, his gaze moving from the screen to Julian. "Julian, is your signature on this document?" Julian opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The lie died before it was born. His shoulders slumped in defeat. The mask was off. "This is a witch hunt," he whispered, but the fight had gone out of him. "No, Julian," Arthur said, his voice cold and final. "This is a board meeting. And based on the evidence presented by Miss Vance, we have a fiduciary and ethical crisis. I move that we vote immediately on a motion of no confidence in Julian Croft's leadership, effective immediately, and suspend him from all duties pending a full independent investigation." The vote was swift. 11 hands went up. Brenda Shaw, after a moment of furious hesitation, reluctantly raised hers. It was unanimous. "Security will escort you to your office to collect personal items," Arthur said to Julian. "You are not to access any company systems. Your access is revoked as of this moment." The humiliation was complete. Julian was led away not by assistants, but by 2 stern-faced security guards. He didn't look at me again. The door closed behind him, leaving me alone with the 12 most powerful people at Novatech. The room was silent again, but this time the energy was different. It was contemplative. "Miss Vance," Arthur began, turning to me. "You have presented us with a catastrophic problem. The immediate damage control will be immense. The summit scandal, now this, our stock will plummet when this gets out." "I am aware, sir," I replied. But the problem was already there, festering. I have simply brought it to light before it caused irreparable harm. The greater catastrophe would have been allowing it to continue. "What do you propose we do now?" another board member asked, a woman named Isabella Rossi who had watched the entire proceeding with sharp, intelligent eyes. The company needs a narrative. It needs stability. I took a deep breath. This was the moment I had planned for. The narrative, I said, is that Novatech is stronger than any one individual. That it has robust systems in place to uncover wrongdoing and the courage to act on it. The narrative is not about a fallen CEO, but about a company self-correcting with integrity. I paused, letting the words sink in. You need to announce that an internal whistleblower protocol, championed by the board, uncovered these discrepancies. That you acted swiftly and decisively. You position it not as a failure, but as a testament to the company's governance. And what about the whistleblower? Arthur asked, his eyes boring into mine. What do you want, Elena? This was it. The crossroads. I could have asked for money. A massive settlement. But that would have made me just another paid-off secret. I wanted more. I wanted what I had earned. I want Project Chimera, I said, my voice firm. I want to lead the team that brings it to market. Not as an assistant, but as its head of product and innovation. I want a seat at the table where decisions are made. My ideas, my work, built this company's most valuable asset. I intend to see it through. A murmur went around the table. It was an audacious demand, but it was also the only logical choice. They had just seen my strategic mind in action. I had outmaneuvered their CEO. I knew the product better than anyone alive. And the transition? Isabella Rossi asked, a hint of a smile on her lips. It will be messy. The announcement will state that Julian Croft has resigned to pursue other opportunities, I said. The board has appointed an interim leadership committee, which I will advise directly on the Chimera project. The story breaks on our terms, not through leaks. We control the narrative. Arthur Finch looked around the table, gauging the consensus. He saw nods. They were backed into a corner, and I was the only one with a viable map out. Very well, Miss Vance, he said, a note of respect in his voice. Consider yourself the interim head of product and innovation for Project Chimera. You will report directly to this board. We will draft the press release immediately. As I walked out of the boardroom, the weight of the past 5 years felt different. It was no longer a burden. It was the foundation of my new authority. But I knew the hardest part was yet to come, facing the company, the colleagues who had only ever known me as Julian's silent shadow. The battle for the boardroom was won. The war for respect was just beginning. The news of Julian's sudden resignation and my unprecedented promotion exploded through Novatech like a silent shockwave. The official press release, crafted under Arthur Finch's stern oversight and my strategic input, was a masterpiece of corporate spin. It spoke of a new chapter of transparent leadership, empowering the true innovators within the company, and a renewed commitment to ethical excellence. My name was mentioned as a key architect of Chimera who would now be rightfully leading its development. But within the sterile, open-plan offices of Novatech, the official story was dissected, doubted, and devoured by the grapevine. Whispers followed me everywhere. I was no longer Elena Vance, the efficient assistant. I was now either a heroic whistleblower, a cunning mastermind, or an opportunistic traitor, depending on who you asked. My first day as interim head of product and innovation was a trial by fire. My new office was Julian's old office. They had cleared out his personal effects with startling speed, but the ghost of his arrogance still lingered in the air. The floor-to-ceiling windows that once felt like a symbol of his power now felt like a fishbowl. Every time I looked up, I saw curious, anxious, or outright hostile faces staring back at me from the bullpen. My first challenge was the Chimera team itself. These were the brilliant engineers and developers I had once coordinated meetings for. I had fetched their coffee, booked their travel, and taken their meeting minutes. Now, I was their boss. I called an all-hands meeting in the main conference room. The air was thick with tension as I walked in. The room fell silent. I saw Liam Chen, the engineer Julian had forced out, sitting in the front row. I had personally called him and offered him his job back, with a promotion and a formal apology from the company. His presence was a visible reminder of the new order. "Good morning," I began, my voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. I decided against standing behind the podium. I leaned against the edge of the large table, trying to project approachability rather than distant authority. I know this is an unusual situation. A week ago, I was scheduling your meetings. Today, I'm leading this project. I won't insult your intelligence by pretending this is a normal transition. A few people shifted uncomfortably. I'm not here because I played corporate politics. I'm here because Chimera was my idea. I built its core architecture on my laptop during nights and weekends while being paid to manage Julian Croft's calendar. I paused, letting that sink in. The code base you've been working on for the past 6 months? The initial framework was mine. The bug that caused the glitch at the summit? It was in a module Julian insisted on modifying against my explicit recommendations. I saw nods of understanding from a few senior developers. They had fought with Julian over technical decisions before. They knew his limitations. So, where does that leave us? I continued. It leaves us with a golden opportunity. The board has given us a clean slate. No more stolen ideas. No more decisions driven by ego instead of engineering. Our only goal is to make Chimera the revolutionary product it was always meant to be. And I need every single one of you to do that. I then laid out my vision. Not with grand, meaningless buzzwords, but with technical specifics. I talked about the bottlenecks in the current code, the areas where we could innovate further, the realistic timelines. I spoke their language. The suspicion in the room began to slowly thaw, replaced by a flicker of professional curiosity. But the resistance wasn't over. Later that afternoon, Mark, the former lead developer whom Julian had promoted for his sycophancy rather than his skill, stormed into my office without knocking. "This is a joke, Elena," he said, his face red. "You can't just waltz in here and take over. I have 10 years of experience. You're an assistant with a lucky break." I looked up from my computer, my expression calm. "First, Mark, it's Elena or Ms. Vance now. Second, the door has a knob for a reason. Use it next time." He blinked, thrown off by my directness. "And as for your experience," I continued, "your last performance review, which I wrote for Julian, noted your repeated failure to meet deadlines on the Orion project. Your experience resulted in a 6-week delay that cost the company $2 million. Would you like to discuss that in more detail with the board?" His bravado deflated. He had assumed I was still the passive assistant who would absorb his abuse. He didn't realize I now had access to every file, every email, every performance metric in the company. I knew every skeleton in every closet. "Now," I said, my voice softening but leaving no room for argument. "You have a choice. You can use your 10 years of experience to help me fix the mess you helped Julian create. Or you can update your resume. The decision is yours." He left, chastened and silent. It was a small victory, but a crucial one. Word spread quickly. Elena Vance was not to be underestimated. The external challenges were even more daunting. The tech news sites, initially satisfied with the press release, began digging. "Who is the mystery woman who brought down a tech titan?" one headline read. "Is Elena Vance a hero or a hacker?" speculated another. My past was being unearthed. My abandoned master's thesis was found and published online, proving the genesis of my ideas predated Julian's claims. Reporters camped outside the Novatech building. I knew I had to face them. With the board's approval, I held a small, tightly controlled press conference. I wore the same navy blue dress. I was calm, poised, and devastatingly factual. I didn't trash Julian. I simply stated the truth. I believed in Novatech's mission so much that I stayed for 5 years, even when my contributions were overlooked. I finally spoke up not for personal gain, but because the company's integrity, and the hard work of my colleagues, was being compromised. I am now focused on one thing: delivering on the promise of Project Chimera for the people who truly matter, our users. The performance was a masterstroke. It positioned me as loyal, principled, and capable. The narrative began to turn. But the biggest test came from the market. Novatech's stock price, as Arthur Finch predicted, had taken a brutal hit after Julian's ousting. Major clients were nervous. A key partnership with a global telecom giant, Omnitel, was on the verge of collapse. Their CEO, a notoriously hard-nosed man named Carl Reynolds, demanded a meeting with the new leadership. He wanted assurances that Chimera was still viable. The board was panicking. The fate of the company literally hinged on this one meeting. "You have to lead this, Elena," Arthur Finch told me, his voice heavy with anxiety. "You're the only one who knows the product inside and out. You're the only one who can save this deal." The weight of a multi-billion-dollar company was on my shoulders. I had fought for this seat at the table. Now, I had to prove I deserved it. The meeting with Carl Reynolds was set. It would be the ultimate test of my knowledge, my poise, and my newfound authority. Failure was not an option. The day of the meeting with Carl Reynolds arrived, cloaked in a palpable sense of dread and anticipation throughout Novateca's executive floor. This wasn't just a client meeting. It was a trial for the company's very survival, and I was its sole defender. The board had made it clear. Losing the Omnitel partnership could trigger a chain reaction, leading other clients to flee and potentially sending Novatec into a death spiral from which it might not recover. Spent the morning not in frantic last-minute rehearsals, but in a state of focused calm. I retreated to a small, quiet breakout room, away from the anxious stares of my colleagues and the board members who had begun to gather, their nervous energy seeping under the door. I closed my eyes and visualized the meeting. I didn't see myself as an imposter in a role I'd stolen. I saw myself as the only person in the world who truly understood the product we were selling. I was not going to plead for their business. I was going to demonstrate why we were their only logical choice. Arthur Finch found me there. "Elena," he said, his voice uncharacteristically soft, "the entire board is here. We'll be sitting in, but the floor is yours. We're relying on you." He looked every one of his 70-plus years, the weight of the company visibly bowing his shoulders. "Trust the product, Arthur," I said, meeting his gaze. "That's all we have to do." An hour later, we were arrayed on one side of the massive conference table. The air was chilled, the lighting perfectly calibrated. On the other side sat Carl Reynolds and his team. Reynolds was a man built like a bulldog, with a grip that could crush stone and eyes that missed nothing. He didn't bother with pleasantries. "Finch," he grunted, nodding at Arthur. "Your press release was a nice piece of fiction. My board doesn't care about fiction. They care about stability. They care about results. You've lost your CEO, your stock is in the toilet, and the tech blogs are having a field day. Convince me in the next 30 minutes why I shouldn't tear up our contract and take my business to EtherCorp." He leaned back, crossing his arms. The challenge was thrown down, Chilua Lua de Bear and unconcealed, all eyes turned to me. Arthur began to speak, but I gently raised my hand, a subtle signal that I had this. It was a risky move, interrupting the board chairman, but necessary to establish my authority from the first second. "Mr. Reynolds," I began, my voice clear and steady, devoid of the nervous tremor I felt inside. "Thank you for your directness. I appreciate it. Fiction is indeed worthless. So, let's talk about code." I bypassed the flashy presentation slides Julian had prepared. Instead, I directly pulled up the live Chimera development environment on the main screen. I entered my administrator credentials. "What you're about to see is our real-time build. No demos, no pre-recorded videos. This is the engine itself." I then took him on a journey. I didn't talk about market disruption or paradigm shifts. I talked about data processing speeds, algorithmic efficiency, and security protocols. I drilled down into the specific lines of code that addressed Omnitel's most pressing challenges: network optimization and predictive maintenance for their global infrastructure. I showed him the exact module that had glitched at the summit, explaining not just the error, but the superior, more elegant solution my team had since implemented. Reynolds' arms remained crossed, but his eyes were locked on the screen. His technical experts, who had been looking bored, were now leaning forward, their fingers flying across their own tablets as they followed along. "Your main concern with EtherCorp's solution," I continued, switching gears seamlessly, "is its black box nature. They offer you results, but not transparency. You have to trust their output without understanding the process. I pulled up a side-by-side comparison. Chimera's architecture is built on explainable AI. Every decision it makes is traceable, auditable. For a company in a regulated industry like yours, that isn't a feature, Mr. Reynolds. It's a necessity. I was no longer just selling a product. I was diagnosing his problems and presenting mine as the only viable cure. I spoke with a depth of understanding that could never be faked. I answered his team's technical questions with a precision that left them nodding in respect. I had transformed the meeting from a plea for forgiveness into a masterclass in technological superiority. After 45 minutes, Reynolds held up a hand. Enough. The room fell silent. He stared at me for a long, uncomfortable moment, his face unreadable. Then, he turned to Arthur Finch. "Finch," he said, a slow grin spreading across his face. "You should have fired that arrogant bastard Croft years ago and put her in charge sooner." He stood up and walked around the table, extending his hand not to Arthur, but to me. "Ms. Vance. That was the most impressive damn thing I've seen in 30 years in this business. You didn't just save your contract. You've convinced me to increase our investment. I want to be first in line when Chimera launches." The relief in the room was physical, like a pressure valve being released. Arthur Finch looked like he might weep. The board members were shaking hands, their faces etched with stunned exhilaration. The news of the successful Omnitel meeting and the expanded contract was a tidal wave that washed away the last vestiges of doubt. Novatech's stock price didn't just recover, it soared past its previous highs. The narrative in the press shifted completely. I was no longer the mystery woman or the whistleblower. I was Elena Vance, the tech visionary who saved Novatech. In the weeks that followed, my position solidified. The interim tag was removed from my title. I was officially the head of product and innovation, with a seat on the executive leadership team. I hired strategically, bringing in talents like Liam Chen and other voices that had been silenced under Julian's reign. We fostered a culture of collaboration and brutal honesty, where the best idea won, regardless of whose title it came from. But success, I was learning, bred new challenges. The target on my back was now brighter than ever, not from within, but from without. Competitors who had laughed at Novatech's turmoil were now watching me with wary eyes. And in the shadows of my newfound fame, the past began to stir. One evening, as I was working late, my personal phone buzzed with an unknown number. I ignored it. A few minutes later, a text message came through. "Congratulations on the Omnitel deal, Elena. Quite a rise for the girl from the tiny apartment. It would be a shame if certain private matters from your past found their way to the board. Let's talk. An old friend." The message was signed with a single initial, J. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. Julian was not done with me. The battle for the company was won, but a new, more personal war was just beginning. The ledger had given me power, but it seemed the past demanded a final payment. The text message from Jay felt like a splash of ice water on the warm glow of success. I was sitting in my new corner office, the city lights twinkling like a carpet of diamonds below, a testament to how far I had come. And in an instant, Julian had managed to pull me back into the shadows of the past. Private matters. The phrase was deliberately vague, designed to maximize anxiety. What did he know? Or more accurately, what did he think he knew that he could use as leverage? My mind raced through the possibilities. My life before Novatech had been unremarkable, a scholarship student working tirelessly to get her master's degree. But everyone has secrets, small shames, or moments of poor judgment they'd rather forget. Had he hired a private investigator? Had he found something from my university days? A foolish mistake? A forgotten debt? The uncertainty was his weapon. I didn't respond immediately. Panic was what he wanted. Instead, I did what I had become best at. I analyzed the situation coldly. This wasn't a corporate boardroom. This was a back alley threat. But the principles were the same. Assess your opponent's position, their resources, and their endgame. Julian's position was weak. He was ousted, disgraced, and likely facing legal scrutiny from the board's ongoing investigation. His resources were dwindling. His endgame was clear: to hurt me, to tarnish my hard-won reputation, and perhaps to extort money. I forwarded the text to my lawyer, David, and to Arthur Finch, with a brief explanation. Transparency was my shield now. "He's making threats," I wrote. "I believe it's a desperate attempt at intimidation." Arthur's response was immediate and fierce. "The board stands with you, Elena. We will engage our security team. Do not engage with him." But Julian was clever. He hadn't risen to the top by being a fool. A few days later, a plain manila envelope arrived at my apartment building, addressed to me by hand. My doorman, knowing the heightened security, alerted me immediately. Inside, there were no documents, just a single, grainy printed photograph. It was a picture of me, from over 6 years ago, sitting in a dimly lit campus bar with a man I had almost forgotten. His name was Alex. The photo was innocuous enough, but the implication was clear. Julian was telling me he could dig into my personal life, that he could fabricate a narrative around an innocent memory. A note was paper-clipped to the photo. "Memory lane is a dangerous street to walk down, Elena. Especially when others are watching. Let's talk, Jay." This time, I was angry. This was no longer about business. It was a violation. I called David. "This is harassment," I said, my voice tight with fury. "Can we get a restraining order?" "We can try," David replied, "but it's a process." He's being careful not to make explicit threats. The photo itself isn't illegal. He's playing a psychological game. I knew I couldn't let this game continue. I couldn't live looking over my shoulder, wondering when the next envelope would arrive. The board's security team could protect my physical safety, but they couldn't protect my peace of mind. I had to end this. On my terms, I decided to meet him, but I would control the where, the when, and the how. I used an encrypted messaging app to send a reply to the number. "1 meeting. Tomorrow, 4 p.m. The public gardens, by the fountain. Come alone. If I see anyone with you, the meeting is over, and everything I have on you goes to the SEC, not just the board." It was a risk. A public place was safer, but it also meant exposure. I was betting that Julian's desire for revenge, or perhaps a payout, was greater than his desire for a public scene. The next day, I arrived early. The gardens were bustling with people enjoying the afternoon sun. I sat on a bench near the fountain, the sound of water masking the pounding of my heart. I wore sunglasses and a hat, not just as a disguise, but as a barrier. David and a private security detail were positioned discreetly nearby, watching. At exactly 4 p.m., I saw him. Julian looked older, diminished. The expensive suit was replaced with a casual jacket, but he couldn't hide the air of bitterness that clung to him. He sat down on the bench next to me, leaving a careful space between us. "Elena," he said, his voice a low snarl. "You look prosperous. Let's skip the small talk, Julian. What do you want?" "I want what's fair," he said, staring ahead at the fountain. "You destroyed my career. You took everything from me. A little compensation seems equitable." "So this is about money," I said, my disgust evident. "How much?" "10 million, he said without hesitation. "A pittance compared to what you've saved Novatech. And in return, your secrets stay buried. All of them." "What secrets, Julian?" I asked, turning to face him. "What exactly do you think you have on me? A photo of me having a drink with a friend in college? Do you really think the board, or the public, will care about that, after what they know about you?" A muscle twitched in his jaw. "It's not just the photo. I know about the scholarship. The one you supposedly won fair and square." My blood ran cold. The Harrison grant. It had been my ticket out of a life of struggle. I had won it, but the application had required a letter from a professor who had suddenly passed away. In a moment of desperate panic, I had written the letter myself and forged his signature. It was the one act of my life I was deeply ashamed of. I had buried it for years. How had he found out? He saw the flicker in my eyes and smiled, a cruel, triumphant smile. "Ah, you see? Everyone has a price. Everyone has a sin. 10 million is a small price to pay to keep that particular sin from the Stanford Review Board, don't you think? Imagine the headlines. Novateka's ethical savior built on a foundation of fraud. I felt sick. He had found the one chink in my armor. The one thing that could truly destroy the integrity I had fought so hard to establish. The fountain's cheerful splash suddenly sounded mocking. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to think. He was right. It was a devastating revelation. But he had made one fatal mistake. He had shown me his entire hand. He thought this was his checkmate. He didn't realize I had been playing a different game all along. Okay, I said softly, looking down at my hands. Okay, he repeated, leaning closer, his voice eager. You agree? I agree that you found something, I said, looking up and meeting his gaze. But you've misjudged the player, Julian. You're still trying to blackmail the assistant. You're not dealing with the assistant anymore. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. I tapped the screen and placed it on the bench between us. A waveform danced on the screen. A recording was in progress. His eyes widened in horror. I learned from the best, I said, my voice cold as steel. Single-party consent state, remember? This conversation is being recorded. You just attempted to extort $10 million from me by threatening to reveal a personal, non-material fact from my past. That's a felony, Julian. And I have a witness. I gave a slight nod. David and the security guard began walking toward us. Julian's face went from triumph to sheer panic. You set me up. No, I corrected him, standing up. I allowed you to hang yourself. The board knows I'm here. My lawyer is here. The photo, the text messages, and now this recording? You're not just disgraced, Julian. You're going to be prosecuted. He stared at me, his mouth agape, finally understanding the depth of his miscalculation. He had tried to fight the new Elena with the old rules, and he had lost completely. As David approached, I gave him one last look. The game is over. If you ever contact me again, this recording goes straight to the district attorney. Stay out of my life. I turned and walked away, the sound of the fountain fading behind me, along with the ghost of my past. The final thread had been severed. I was truly free. The confrontation in the garden was the final, decisive battle. Julian, faced with the recording and the presence of my lawyer, crumbled completely. He knew he had overplayed his hand. True to my word, I didn't send the recording to the district attorney immediately. Instead, I used it as the ultimate deterrent. Through my lawyer, we delivered a simple, unequivocal message: any further contact, any attempt to spread rumors, and the full weight of the law would come down on him. The fear of criminal prosecution was a far more effective silencer than any financial payoff could ever be. We learned he left the state shortly afterward, fading into the obscurity he so richly deserved. With that shadow lifted, I could finally focus entirely on the future, not just of Novatek, but of my own life. The months that followed were a period of unprecedented growth and stability for the company. Project Chimera launched not with the hyped-up fanfare of the Julian era, but with a quiet, powerful confidence that resonated deeply with the market. It was a runaway success, praised not only for its innovation but for its robustness and ethical design, a direct reflection of the new culture we had built. Our stock price stabilized at a historic high, and the company was lauded in business journals as a case study in successful corporate self-correction. My role evolved. I was no longer just the head of product. I became the public face of Novateka's integrity. I was invited to speak at conferences about ethical AI and corporate governance. I used these platforms not to boast, but to advocate for the invisible people in every company, the assistants, the interns, the junior developers, whose ideas and hard work are so often the true engines of success. I started an internal incubator program specifically designed to nurture and fund ideas from employees at all levels, ensuring that no future Elena would have her passion stifled. One afternoon, Arthur Finch came to my office. He didn't sit in the visitor's chair. He stood by the window, looking out at the city he had helped build. Elena, he said, his back to me. The board met this morning. We've decided to create a new position, Chief Visionary Officer. It's more than a title. It's a mandate to shape the long-term direction of this company, to ensure the values you've instilled become permanent. He turned to face me, a faint smile on his lips. The vote was, once again, unanimous. The job is yours, if you want it. I accepted. It wasn't about the title or the pay. It was about the ability to institutionalize the change I had fought so hard for. It was about building a legacy that would outlast me. On a personal level, the journey had transformed me. I bought a new apartment, not as a symbol of wealth, but as a space that was entirely mine, free from the ghosts of my past struggles. I reconnected with old friends I had neglected during the years of grueling work under Julian. I even went on a few dates, learning to trust again, to talk about something other than code and corporate strategy. About a year after the gala scandal, I received an email. It was from the Stanford Review Board. My heart stopped for a second. But the email wasn't an accusation. It was an invitation. They were starting an ethics in technology initiative and wanted me to be the keynote speaker at its launch. The irony was profound. I spent a long night wrestling with the decision. Finally, I wrote back, accepting the invitation. But I added a condition. I wanted to endow a new scholarship in my mother's name for students from underprivileged backgrounds who showed exceptional promise in ethical technology. And I requested a private meeting with the board chairman before my speech. In that meeting, I did something I never thought I would have the courage to do. I confessed. I told him about the Harrison grant, about the forged letter, about the desperate act of a young woman who saw a single chance and took it. I explained that my entire career since had been an attempt to atone for that moment, to prove that I was worthy of the opportunity one had stolen. The chairman, an elderly man with kind eyes, listened intently. When I finished, he was silent for a moment. "Elena," he said gently, "thank you for your candor. What you did was wrong. There's no excusing it." He paused. "But the person who did that is not the person sitting in front of me today. You have spent years building a life of integrity on top of a single mistake. The scholarship you're creating will do more good than that grant ever could. Consider the matter closed." The relief was absolute. It was the final piece of my redemption, granted not by an institution, but by my own willingness to finally face the truth. My speech at Stanford was about the importance of building systems that don't force people into impossible choices, and the courage it takes to correct your course when you've made a mistake. The story ends not with a dramatic victory, but with a quiet sense of peace and purpose. Novatech is thriving. My father, who watched my journey from a distance with growing pride, now calls me every Sunday. We talk about everything except work. I still work hard, but I no longer live to work. I have a life, a real one, filled with people I respect and who respect me. Looking back, I see that the night of the summit wasn't the end of my old life. It was the painful birth of my new one. I learned that your worth is not defined by your title, but by your character. That success built on the exploitation of others is a hollow victory. That sometimes, the greatest strength lies not in fighting back with the same weapons used against you, but in building a better, unassailable truth. And most importantly, I learned that the best revenge is not destruction, but transformation. Not tearing down the old world, but building a new, better one in its place. Victoria tried to erase me to protect her image, and she lost everything. I chose to redefine myself through my actions, and I gained everything that truly mattered. If you are watching this and feel trapped by your circumstances, remember that you hold the power to change the narrative. Your value doesn't decrease based on someone's inability to see your worth. Sometimes, you have to become the CEO of your own life before anyone else will take you seriously. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever felt invisible in your own life, know that you are not alone. Share your stories in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, subscribe to Elite Secrets for more stories about finding your power in a world that tries to overlook you. Remember, the greatest secrets aren't about wealth or status. They're about courage, integrity, and the quiet strength to never, ever give up on yourself.